Did you know that this album was split up into two parts due to a movie that they were inspired by? Who did the artwork for these albums? Did you know that this album has the song that won the band a Grammy, and that these two immense albums were not the band's first attempt at doing a two-part record? Well, stick around as we discuss all of these points and more on this retro review, covering two albums, Mezmerize and Hypnotize by System of a Down. Before System of a Down had issues offstage, they had, well, issues offstage. After conquering the music scene with their blend of Armenian music meeting metal through their record Toxicity, the band would find themselves in high demand, and being extremely famous musicians, they also required high supplies. Their follow-up album for Toxicity was highly anticipated, and being in the era of P2P downloading, such as with apps of Napster or LimeWire, it was a dangerous time, and the band would certainly find themselves in the crosshairs firsthand when their third album would end up being leaked online, naming all the tracks and having containing all the songs just for everyone to share. To combat this, the group would haphazardly record sections of songs and rename every single track, even renaming the album in a tongue-in-cheek jab Steal This Album, and distributing the record with no booklet or front cover album artwork, or any such deal. So it just looked like a plain CD that was a burnt version your friend would have given you. Honestly, I need to cover this album in a separate retro review, because the story behind it is wild. Anyway, while it was an interesting marketing strategy, it ended up backfiring, as the record sold underwhelming figures, perhaps not helped by the lack of radio airplay the songs had. Now with the beast of burden off their backs, the band could focus on their new album, or rather albums, as their attention shifted from the usual method of writing songs for another record, instead being focused on a creative idea, a mini concept that would take place over 2 albums and be released in a short period, less than 6 months to be exact. In fact, the band had enough material to record 3 records originally, but they decided against this idea, instead trimming the final product to what it is. The band was actually inspired to release these albums in 2 parts after they saw Quentin Tarantino's movies Kill Bill's Volumes 1 and 2 and the wild success that they had with. Interestingly though, this wasn't the band's first attempt at making 2 parts of an album, and the previously discussed Steal This record was originally intended to be called Toxicity Part 2, and was meant as a follow-up to their breakthrough record Toxicity. Regardless, the band re-enlisted Rick Rubin as the producer of this album, as he had helped them on all their previous efforts, and of course they began sessions at the Mansion. We're talking about that mansion where the bands like Slipknot and Red Hot Chili Peppers and the Mars Volta have all recorded. Then the war happened. But that shouldn't affect the lyrics for a social political metal outfit with Armenian heritage, right? Between these 2 albums, there were 5 singles that were released between March of 2005 all the way up till May of 2006, of which the band would receive 2 Grammy nominations, with one of these songs winning the Best Hard Rock Performance category. So of course it makes sense to start with the song that earned the band their first and only Grammy win. Bring Your Own Bombs. What a way to kick off your newest album, other than, I guess, with a bang. Sorry, pun intended. But indeed, this was the perfect kick up the arse the world needed to know that System of a Down were back and weren't fucking around. It was clear from the onset of the song what this was all about. But it was even more present on the video clip, which featured protesters, parties, and soldiers wearing helmets with words flashing past saying "Obey" and "Bye." Curiously enough, this video clip was directed by Jake Nava, whose other works included Ladies Put a Ring on It. You couldn't have picked a further 6 degrees of separation if you tried. It was clear from the radio airplay it was receiving that this song was a hit, and the band would even get asked to perform this tune on Saturday Night Live, on a performance with a 5-second delay of course, as the producers played it safe to bleep out any F-bombs, which of course they did drop during their performance. However, a close-up of guitarist Darren can be seen yelling "fuck yeah," which could not be cut before airing, so suck shit NBC. The band would never be welcomed back, surprisingly enough. I can't imagine why though. I do love the way this song subverted expectations, as it starts with an acoustic guitar riff being played out before launching into some downright brutal shit, only to yank out that rug once again by bringing the acoustic guitars back for the verse. The level of progression heard on here is crazy from the band, as it shifts from downright heavy mosh pit level parts to acoustic melodies, shifting almost like some kind of weighted item on the end of a long stick that moves from side to side in I don't know, some kind of rhythmic fashion or something. You get what I'm putting down? I don't know, maybe I'm not describing it right. This is one of the finest pieces off the album, and is interesting to hear when you are listening to it in subsequent playthroughs, and the song Sad Statue, which I highly recommend you play as a 1-2 kind of hit, as that piece just launches us into the depths of the pit. It's perfect pairing. So good. The song's lyrics for this tune have been inspired from previous events, as opposed to current for this tune, and that can be heard with their references to the protest in Tiananmen Square. For any of my younger audience, this was a very infamous event in Chinese history that took place in 1989, and features the very iconic image of the man standing in front of the tank to stop the army from breaking up the uni students who were protesting at the time. Nothing is known about the individual who seemed to be out for groceries on the day when he stepped in front of that tank, or whether he survived. But despite many attempts to try and locate him over the years, I doubt that we will ever find out the true person behind this. It remains one of the mysteries that has been lost to history. It's also a lesson that the song teaches us, as such an iconic event can be forgotten over time, and ultimately whatever caused these protests will become yesterday's news one day. It's important to learn about your history, because as they say, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And I hope you're taking lessons, America, because now more than ever, we need to take history lessons aboard. The most loneliest day of my life. This is the song that earned the band their 4th Grammy nomination. However, they ended up losing to Wolfmother's song Woman. And really, when you're stacked up against that beast of a tune, then how could you blame them? This tune seems to be written about the worst day in Darren's life, and also was used in the 2006 movie Disturbia. Apparently the song also got a second life in 2023, when it was also featured on the Netflix series Beef, on the episode Such Inward Secret Creatures. The same series features a lot of tunes from the 90s and noughties, and has served as a starting point for a lot of younger people to find out about music from, well, this era, such as Hoobastank and the Smashing Pumpkins, who have also been featured in this series. And if that's your introduction to System of a Down, then so be it. That's how it is. As long as you find out about this band, that's really all that matters. The opening riff was inspired by The House of the Rising Sun, which makes sense in hindsight, and I never quite picked up on this until doing my research on this episode. Sex sells. Always has, always will. It's marketing 101, and this song just covers the subject matter in a way that only the band know how to, with weird euphemisms and double entendres. It's why we have this famous line. Because, you know, the banana is like a pea, never mind, you get it. Anyway, Serge has this to say about the lyric. I like creating relationships between things that don't have a pre-existing one. I was thinking of a banana. I don't know how it even came up in my head. Banana terracotta pie. He also adds that when he pitched this to Rick Rubin, he absolutely hated the idea, but came around to this part once he heard it incorporated in the song. Also on the YouTube series Last Meals, there was an episode featuring Serge where he does in fact eat a banana pie served in a terracotta dish, but I'm sure that's not the first time he ate from the terracotta pie, eh?
Can we get the banana terracotta pie for the lightning round, please?
Terracotta pie. Hey, terracotta pie. Actual last meal list. Don't talk.
Yes,
That
sir.
is too good. Oh my god.
From being influenced by the Kinks to Dark Throne, this album has all of it in between. There are a lot of songs I didn't really cover, and a lot of tunes that also deserve some high praise, such as Old School Hollywood. This was based around Darren's experience playing Star Night Celebrity Baseball, and how disheartened he was meeting many of the famous older celebrities. Or another track like You Fig. And how the media brainwashed people into violence. Or perhaps maybe... Okay, that pretty much sums up the band at this time, I guess, in their headspace. I mean, how are you supposed to explain this away? Look, I know people will try and explain this as a song about world leaders in a dick measuring contest, but come on man, The two parts are very different, and I don't jump to this conclusion. Still, these albums contain some absolutely great tracks, and there's really no filler tunes that I can think of. There's hardly any songs I would give a skip, and if you're listening to it from start to finish, it's an absolutely amazing accomplishment. The other interesting thing is that both of these albums technically could have fit on one CD back in the day, as both of these records just fall under that 78-minute mark. Now, I always felt like Mezmerize was the more cohesive and melodic effort, while Hypnotize, well, that always gave me the impression of being as strung out as someone who is balls deep in 2 8 balls of cocaine at 3 AM in the morning, with a few of their songs like Attack or Tentative. But then again, I could say that about a lot of tracks in System of a Down's history, I guess. Still, Mezmerize was the album I bought and listened to on high repetition, as opposed to Hypnotize, which I actually never bought. Ended up borrowing that from my brother. So of course I'm going to favour that one over the other. To me, Mezmerize is so ingrained in my memory that pretty much I know this word for word at this stage, and I believe a lot of that has to do with the runtime of the album, which is a very short 36 minutes in length. Actually, if you combine these two albums, like I said, it would have managed to fit all on one CD. Mezmerize was concise, to the point, and contained no filler tracks. It blended the band's eclectic style with ferocious melodies. B.Y.O.B wasn't just the perfect lead single off the album, rather, it was the perfect protest song for a generation as well. Something that hasn't been felt since the Vietnam era, or hasn't been felt still to this day. The way Mezmerize just plays out is perfect, especially right up until that last song, Lost in Hollywood. And its build-up just gives me pure chills every time. Also at 5+ minutes, this is one of the longest songs written by the band. Hypnotize tried to do something similar back in the day with Lonely Day, but it doesn't quite meet those highs heard earlier. Still a great track though, and of course the whole thing gets tied together with the Soldier Side intro and outro, but then again it was a wildly ambitious project, but it was perhaps a little bit too much for the band to chew in the end, as we would all find out. When Mezmerize was first released, it received critical acclaim, with Metacritic giving a score of 85 out of 100, AllMusic giving a score of 4.5 out of 5, Blabbermouth giving a score of 4 out of 5, Drown in Sound giving a score of 8 out of 10, Entertainment Weekly giving an A-, People giving a 3 out of 4, Pitchfork giving a 7.1 out of 10, Pop Matters giving a 9 out of 10, Rolling Stone Magazine giving a 3.5 out of 5, Stylus giving a B-, and Uncut giving a score of 4 out of 5. Meanwhile, over at RachelMusic.com, the album sits at a score of 3.77 from nearly 20,000 reviews. As for me, I'm going to give this album a score of 13.5 million chilies on the spicy scale, with my favourite tracks being B.Y.O.B, Question, Lost in Hollywood, and Cigarro. When Hypnotize was released, it didn't receive the strong support that Mezmerize had previously, but it was still met with mostly positive reviews. Over at Metacritic, the album got a score of 78 out of 100. AllMusic gave the score of 4.5 out of 5. Entertainment Weekly gave a score of B-, The Guardian gave it a 4 out of 5. Pitchfork gave it a 7.9 out of 10. Play Louder giving it a 4.5 out of 5. Pop Matters giving it a 6 out of 10. Rolling Stone Magazine giving it a 3.5 out of 5. Stylus Magazine giving it a C. Sputnik Music giving it a 4 out of 5. And USA Today giving a score of 3 out of 4. Meanwhile, over at Rachel Music, the album sits at a score of 3.5 from nearly 16,000 reviews. As for me, I think I would give this album a score of 9 million chilies on my spicy scale, with my favourite tracks being Hypnotized, Vicinity of Obscenity, and Holy Mountain. Look, if you want a full rundown of System of a Down, and of course how I feel about all their albums and where they stack up, I do have a special episode out, and that is the ranking of the System of a Down albums, so make sure to check that out, but not before this last section. System of a Down will always get compared to Rage Against the Machine, but Mezmerize and Hypnotize made them a bona fide act on their own merits, and helped set them apart from this collusion. This falls down to the nuanced musical differences that set apart such music from their respective counterparts, but namely it fell down to the differences in lyrics and the thematic changes that was largely surrounding the themes of war at that time. Being of Armenian heritage, and their culture having suffered a genocide at the hands of the Ottoman Empire less than 100 years earlier during World War I that wiped out nearly 1.5 million people's lives, the band couldn't shake the notion of history repeating itself with the current circumstances that were certainly going on. War is never good. war never changes. This would help drive a message that was different from their predecessors and would easily set them apart. But possibly the greatest contribution of all has to do with the timing as always. Only 5 years earlier, Rage Against the Machine had called it a day and had left a vacuum in their wake. This, coupled with the growing political tensions that were seen under the Bush administration and its involvement in the war in Iraq, left many to desire a new politically motivated band who would take up this mantle and take up the fight. This is where System of a Down comes into play with their album Mezmerize and Hypnotize. The band had already garnered enough attention from the fans, and it was certainly a respected fan base. But now the band had risen to the head of such a movement with no equals, and their legacy as such was cemented with the success of these records, as Mezmerize would go on to become double platinum in America and Hypnotize earning a platinum respectively. Unfortunately for the band, this record set about a chain of events which they have really never come back from, as infighting and quarrels over money and songwriting credits have taken a hold of the group, which led to ugly events taking place behind the scenes of course. Beneath the surface, the band was cracking, and World Music would report years later how the band's player B.Y.O.B didn't even perform a huge chunk of the bass lines on this album because of these issues, but also because he didn't want to play it, to be honest. But the band didn't see that his skill set was up to the standard that they were setting, and instead he was replaced multiple times on the album by Darren, who would write and record the majority of these parts. Another aspect to consider is the clash in between Darren and Serge, as the former started performing more vocals on the albums, including writing many more lyrics than he had on any previous effort. In fact, Serge had unofficially quit the band at the end of recording these albums, which led the group going on a 4-year hiatus, as band members would end up doing other projects in the meantime. Serge started his solo works and albums, and Darren formed Scars on Broadway with drummer John Dolmayan. Perhaps the most intriguing and unknown side project had to be that of bassist B.Y.O.B, who went on to form a band called You Chosen with some members from Wu-Tang Clan, namely the RZA, and this group would only release 2 singles, but one of these songs would be on the soundtrack for Babylon AD, a sci-fi movie set in a dystopian future and is about a Russian mobster that hires a mercenary to get some girl from Kyrgyzstan to New York City, and it features the Bond girl Michelle Yeoh, that guy who played the Meravichian in the Matrix trilogy, Lambert Wilson, and Vin Diesel, because of course it does, it was 2008 after all. And yes, that is a real sentence I am not making up. Google it. Perhaps the biggest legacy this album had was how it's unofficially the band's Swansong, as to this day this remains the last album the band have ever put out, and I suspect that's going to be the case forever, especially from what I've heard from the band and their camp many times over these years. While the band would reform a few years later and had no issues performing these songs live on stage, the problems arose once they got off the stage and into the studio, and after all these years we all know the story by now because it seems to be a new tell-all article always popping up every couple of weeks whenever they are on tour. We know the band truly hate each other behind the scenes and closed doors. Serge has back problems and barely has it in his heart to even tour these days, instead finding joy writing film scores which are such a far cry to his original style. B.Y.O.B seems to be more interested in painting and his activism to human rights than to the music scene, which is familiar to his father Vartan, who is also a painter and in fact is the one who did all the artwork to both of these albums and everything in between in the booklets. John seems to be the real spanner in the works, however, as his politics have come to the forefront in recent years and under scrutiny with his support of Donald Trump, which paired with the band's previous political statements, and in particular Serge, who is very staunch on his views about Trump and how he opposes him to being president. It beggars belief how he ended up in that camp, but I guess 20 years can do that to any person. And it's more complex because they can't just replace him at the end of the day. He's not just bandmates with Serge, but he is also his brother-in-law, as both their wives are sisters in real life. I'd hate to be at their house during holidays, but I guarantee that's the type of household that does Christmas twice. Darren, however, seems to be the only grounded member who just wants to play music at this point, which is absolutely crazy considering how he acted back in the day. But there may be one last obstacle that we haven't discussed, and that is the biggest one. If the pressure felt from the fanbase and the record label to successfully follow up after Toxicity was immense, then we can only imagine that this would be insurmountable by comparison and perhaps crushing for any possibility to record any music. I can imagine that any excuse the band feels to stop writing would be the best one to choose, because if they wrote anything that was half decent and the fans did not like it, it would just be torn to shreds out in the public point of view. I mean, the band aren't young anymore as well either. Ideas might not be as fresh or band members' views on the same page, so rule out any negative tunes about Trump right away, and the pressure of course would be just too difficult to overcome. Anything that they did would never reach the highs, so why tarnish their legacy at this stage? And lastly, considering that there is little money in streaming at the end of the day, then it only makes sense that the band focus all their attention on live performing and make their income through touring and selling shirts at the end of the day. Because, well, what's the point of doing anything that could stop you from doing that? It's a shame, because at these parts we find ourselves at now we need a band like System of a Down now, more than ever, but I don't see any young groups rising up and doing this anytime soon. Still, it wasn't the last music to be released by the group, as they did have that split single called Protect the Land's Genocidal Humanoids, but shit, that was nearly 5 years ago now. So yes, I don't think that System of a Down will ever be releasing an album again. And I guess this is that swan song that we're gonna get. And what a great way to close out their discography at the end of the day, with a high, while the band was in their prime. Not many acts get the ability to do this. If you've enjoyed this content, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to us, and stay notified for future music related content, because it keeps our manager happy at the end of the day. We are also on Discord, Instagram, Facebook, and all those other social platforms if you want to check us out. As always, people, you have a great day and stay spicy.